Okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, what happened? Okay, that was a surprise. Okay. Hi, everybody, and I'm really excited. Thank you for David and Dean for inviting me for a chance to talk about on climate change framing and innovative attention, evidence from an email field experiment. And to give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about here, let me tell you about the Lorax, right? And the Lorax is this book by Dr. Seuss that is about solving environmental damage. And the whole book comes down to this message, right? Which is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. And the idea there is that to actually solve environmental issues, there's something about not only understanding them, but actually kind of caring, having an attention towards that, and that leads to potentially more action. And so we do know in economics that this idea of attention is very key to decision making, right? That it's not just it's not just your ability to process rationally all the problems, but that actually being able to focus on some of them makes a difference. It makes a difference for stock prices, for savings, for taxes. I like this quote by Xavier Gaveix that says, it is clear our attention is limited, kind of emphasizing how important it is to use it judiciously. All right, and when you think about attention, you typically, in climate change, which is what we're going to be talking about today, you typically think about something like environmental activism, right? And so you think about the work by Greta Thunberg. It's trying to bring that as an important problem. Here at MIT, there used to be, for example, Jay Forrester, who created a whole technology to kind of foreshadow and show how important, in his book World Dynamics, how important the climate change problem was. Indeed, though, as you're thinking about how to advance that, the attention becomes important. Now, most of it is about sort of political action, right? Political action and being able to use that attention to actually lead to different policies. On the other hand, we do recognize that a lot of that at least a share of the improvements upon climate change would come from innovation, right? It would come from innovation. And so, this is the cost of solar panels, and you can see that it's dropped dramatically over time. And it's really by the ability to kind of, of course, the energy that we get on Earth from the sun has always been the same, but it's actually the ability to harness that energy through innovation that has come forward. And so it's not as clear that attention, that's kind of where we're going with this paper. It's not as clear that attention is going to have an impact in something like innovation, right? So if you grab a bunch of innovators and you talk to them about, you have to care about this problem, would actually make a difference. Most research in economics and trying to think about attention does not think about the problem of attention, but rather thinks about climate change as an incentives problem, right? Tax benefits, carbon credits, things like that. And we do know sort of innovators are highly technical and probably understand the problem already quite well. And so explaining it to them might not make a difference. And so this is a paper we did asking the following question: can drawing attention to the problem of climate change increase innovator interest? Would they be able to act upon that? And if so, by how much? And so I want to tell you about this field experiment we did on innovation attention. I'll tell you some results. Then after those kind of reduced form results, we get some structural estimates that allows us to measure underlying parameters in how inventors process information. If I have time, I'll get to the last bullet there. Well, I'll try to put this together with two other experiments that we did on using emails as digital field experiments to kind of explain broader how we have been accessing this field. Okay. So the experiment we did it with MIT Solve. MIT Solve is an organization, obviously here at MIT, with a mission to solve the world challenges. It is not an organization focused on helping students advance their projects. It has actually nothing to do with students, but it's really just the marketplace that occurs at MIT where anybody can propose a project, and by proposing, and they try to bring the right funding kind of to advance that, right? And so we were working with MIT Solve, and of course, one of the world challenges was climate change. And they allowed us to do a collaboration with them where we'd be able to take their marketing materials and vary what we said about climate change. So we wanted to email a bunch of innovators and tell them, hi, did you know that an estimated 155 100,000 lives could be saved in 2020. So we're sending this out in 2020, sort of in the present, by mitigating climate change. To do so, we need innovative solutions, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on the email that we were sending, we might say 150,000, we might say 400,000, we might say 2020, we might say 2050. Why did we choose those numbers? Well, those are kind of we look through the literature and we look within the range of course, the impact of climate change is not a precise number. There's a range of estimates, and we just pick some ranges in that estimate. So they were all kind of within the scientifically valid range, if that makes sense. Okay, and so now, the second challenge we had, now that I explained, well, what are we going to do, is actually finding a sample of high-quality innovators, right? And so while I'm emphasizing the importance of attention, of course, innovators are people that can truly, change photovoltaic cells to improve the capture of solar energy. They're not a lot, right? There's some narrowed few, and so accessing those and making sure you're able to target those would make a big difference in this case. So to do that, we take advantage of something called the SBIR, STTR. Not sure if a lot of people know this. In some settings, a lot of people know it. In others, it's more mixed. So SBIR is a program managed by the National Science Foundation. And what they do in this program is they find emerging technologies that are really promising, but they just seem to need a little more of development before they can become venture-backed, before they can become full-fledged companies. And it is sort of done in partnership with other agencies. And here's just so you get a sense of the type of technologies they do. Here's recycling CO2 into fuels, right? So how do you capture carbon dioxide and put it into fuels? From plastic to trash, from plastic trash to 3D printing, transforming waste carbon dioxide, et cetera, et cetera. And so there really are kind of these really innovative companies. And what's interesting about SBIR is that because it's a government program, we also have the awards. For everybody that's awarded, we have this very clean set of information. So for example, this is the cogeneration of low energy CO2-free hydrogen and ordinarily Portland cement for calcium-rich rocks, right? And so if you're really getting to these climate change issues, some of it comes from construction, actually. Construction turns out to be very climate damaging. And here's a real kind of team trying to innovate this eventually to make it into a company. We're going to take advantage of these information down here, where we also have the principal investigator, the person in charge of kind of inventing this product, and the business contact, which is the person that is more on the business side. Of course, in many cases like this one, it might be the same person. Okay, so we go and we download sort of the full list of SBIR grantees over 20 years, and we get 30,000 SBIR grantees, people that invented real technologies, and we want to ask them, we want to tell them about MIT Solve, and we want to see if by changing climate change framing, it might actually change their attention, right? And you might have a high expectation on that. You might think, well, that sounds like a pretty, sort of a very simple treatment. Maybe it's not a big difference, but I want to tell you what we found. Now, I do want to emphasize that what we identify using this is, I know there's some people that are into identification in the crowd, is we're not actually able to know telling you about climate change versus not telling you about climate change, but rather how do you change your interest in this problem based on how big the disaster is and when it's happening, right? So if I tell you, a lot of people are dying today, you might be more interested than if I tell you a lot of people are dying sort of 100 years from now, for example, right? And so we're really trying to think through those parameters. Okay, so what do we find? First, let me show you the reduced form results. So here's one of my main regressions. We're looking at clicks initially within the first 48 hours, and we get a 20% increase, right? So this is, for obviously click-through rate is 1.5%. It goes to 1.8%, a 20% increase in your probability of going and reading more about this competition if you use the present condition, right? The present condition was the impact happening in 2020 rather than 2050. Also, if you talk what we call high impact condition, which is the live, I told you 400,000 versus 150,000 lives. When we talk about 400,000 lives, we also get a 20% increase in the likelihood of clicking. So we do see entrepreneurs responding responding to these differences. Sorry, innovators responding to these differences and at least clicking through more when we initially look into that. Next, we look a little bit about the location in which they are, and we try to understand who responds more or less. We also looked at the technology that they invented, but the confidence intervals there were honestly just too wide to be able to say much. We were able to see a little more on location, and we found that, you know, when you look at the politics of the location, this is not the person, right? The location in which they are, we don't find big differences. What does that mean? That an innovator in Massachusetts, an innovator in Mississippi, they actually sort of have the same response to this. On the other hand, when you look at places that have high risk of coastal damage, people respond more to lives and they're less present oriented. What does that mean? That, you know, they're really sensitive to how big is the problem rather than when it's happening. And when we look at, when we look at the skill level, they're less responsive to lives and more present oriented. No difference in partisanship. Then we try to push it a little further, right? And we say, well, this is a competition. Do they just click or are they actually applying more? We do show that, you know, places that, you know, when there's more traffic, there's more applications to code, and then MIT solve. And then we do two different surrogate indexes, one through this experiment, another one through a separate experiment we had with a different MIT organizations that maybe I'll get a chance to tell you about. And we actually show that the click behavior is actually predictive of follow-on applications. And there's a big session yesterday on surrogate index, so if you use the surrogate outcome, the surrogate estimate, you get an increase of 3 to 9% in the probability of actually applying. Okay, so that's what we have so far. You know, it's interesting. It does seem that, you know, putting something at the forefront of the attention of an important group, they do go and at least act over the short term on that. Now, we want to put this a little bit more in structural estimates, which is, in the end, you know, you're thinking about these parameters, right? Yes, they respond more when things are sooner, but perhaps you're wondering, you know, it feels, what's the discount rate, right? Anytime you're thinking about this, you're like, what is the discount rate? Or, you know, they are responding more to more lives, but is these, you know, diminishing returns as lives increase, or increasing returns, or a linear effect, or things like that. And so we put a very classic, right? So we put a very classic structural model, a very simple structural model that I think has a lot of applications. And we say, you'd imagine an innovator gets, you know, has different messages that they can act upon, including potential to do nothing, right? Which would be M0. And they say, you know, the value of acting on the message for this personal preference for this message, that's AI. Some sensitivity to your lives lost, so that's L to beta exponent, so that tells you some discount rate, that's 1 minus delta to the T, which is years, which might be 0 or 30 years if it's in 20, you know, today or 30 years from now. And then an error term that is log logistic just for modeling reasons. You take logs of that, and it becomes this very simple problem. And then we impose one additional assumption, which is independence of irrelevant alternatives between the outside option. What does that mean? That the fact that I take this choice, you know, if I get an email telling me, hey, act on climate change, I might click on it or do nothing, but that the fact that that trade-off has nothing to do with, or like the fact that, you know, that effect is independent of how I would respond to a different email and do nothing, right? So it's all versus do nothing. That's where their independence. Then it turns out, we show in the paper, you can use click-through rates to actually bootstrap these parameters. And we get two parameters, right? We get a beta coefficient, which is decreasing returns to live loss. So the beta is kind of low, right? If it was 1, it would be sort of like, you know, linear increasing returns. So this is much lower. That means that, and it's intuitive, right? If I tell you, you know, 1 million people are dying, and I tell you 2, then I tell you sort of, you might respond not as significantly as I kind of go up. You might, you know, I would have to go to 1 billion or something like that, right? Then secondly, the discount rate, we get 0.76, which you know, our paper was the first estimate on the social discount rate. This is just the time value, the time component of that, right? What does that mean? It is about what would happen between the impact happening today versus in the future, and when do I respond to that. Of course, investment rates are higher because you can invest your money in the stock markets, so there's opportunity cost, as well as you might have your own preferences. But at least, this is a pretty interesting parameter, and we're able to estimate some of that for innovation. So the public, for example, the time preference of money is 0.76, while the social discount rate is 3.5. Okay, so let me, so I will get a chance to tell you about the other two. So, what did we do in this experiment? We thought about that the attention of innovators and their action is actually pretty important to solving climate change. If you think climate change is an important problem, which most of us do, then you would appreciate that reducing carbon emissions is important, but all the changes, it's difficult for them to be behavioral, but actually innovation that supports that through greener technologies, things that are changes in our ability to live more in cities and things like that might actually make a big difference. I started with this quote from the Lorax. We collaborated with MIT Solve to do an email field experiment on SBIR innovators, varying the impact and timing of climate change. That's what the experiment looked like. And we find the impact and timing of deaths within scientifically valid scenarios, I mentioned that, predict more clicks and more applications. So of course, we don't have a lot to say about, there's of course, usually the literature has other effects that if you exaggerate things, then people don't believe you, for example. We don't go there. And there's no, you might think this tells you, well, just exaggerate the problem, but that might lead to other effects that are out of scope for us. One limitation, we're not able to know what psychological mechanism is at play. Specifically, we're not able to, we sort of call the attention, but are they updating their priors? Are we just increasing the salience of their priors? They have a prior that climate change is bad, but this gives them much more precision. Multiple of those mechanisms could be at play. It nonetheless presents an important policy implication in terms of messaging, independent of what the exact mechanism is. And so I show you results, and it emphasizes sort of the different avenue for innovation driven by information rather than financial incentives. And so now, this paper, so this is the experiment we did, it just got published, is really a part of a broader agenda with my collaborators, Ananya Sen and Gino. And so I want to tell you a little bit how we use sort of the same technology a few more times to kind of just thinking that this is a methods conference sometimes. And so it gives us a little bit more of that. And so the key challenge, so I'm an entrepreneurship researcher rather than sort of marketing or operations. And the key challenge when you're thinking about entrepreneurship is always very intuitive, is it's very hard to find the entrepreneurs you actually want to hear from, right? If I tell you, and so a lot of entrepreneurship research, they come up with big theories, then they ask a bunch of students. And while students are great and we love them, they're not the same, right, as the kind of entrepreneurs you might have in mind. Or they ask a lot of small business owners, and they are good, but they're different, right? And so taking that on board has always been one of the strongest challenges for entrepreneurship. And so one thing that I really like about our work is that, in the case that I showed you, really was able to access true innovators, right? This was not a class. This was not something happening, in some incubator that is for very early stage things. These were the best innovators in the United States, the ones that really got funded, really got $1 million, and then they were able to grow that. And so, we did a similar thing in this other experiment called What Motivates Innovative Entrepreneurs, where we collaborated with a different MIT organization called the MIT Inclusive Innovation Challenge. And here what we did, we tried to use the same idea, right? That the way you click through emails tells you something about your interests and motivations. And so we sent it similarly marketing messages, but trying to change the emphasis of what the issue was on the MIT Inclusive Innovation Challenge. For some of the messages, we emphasized the social impact of the program, and in other ones, we emphasized the money impact. Now, and so, and we were able to send this three populations: one population of entrepreneurs that were like already part of kind of their MIT email list; a second population with a collaboration with AngelList that allowed us to actually access all kind of one of their announcements. And then we did a third experiment where we had all this program worked in a certain way that it had 2 submission processes. You actually register, and then once everybody's registered, there's an official application process. So we had everybody that registered, but we also had people that registered that had not been through our emails, right? There are other ways you end up registered. So you could grab those people that had not been treated by our emails and run an experiment on them for applications. And we were able to do, to do this experiment 3 times and get pretty consistent results, which was entrepreneur motivations really were dependent, in this case, in gender and culture in a way that was pretty limited, pretty interesting for the literature. Okay, let me skip the rest. There's a lot of other interesting. This is a social class. If you're on the market for a PhD student, our co-author is excellent. But I hope it gave you first a chance. I really wanted to share with you this work on innovators and how we use digital field experiment through emails and their click-through rates, which is a very short-term outcome to actually learn something. And then how that is kind of an approach that at least we've used it successfully, trying to solve what is important in our field, which is getting the right innovators, getting the right scientists, getting the right entrepreneurs, and hearing from them is always one of the challenges. And so, using emails for experimentation allows accessing hard-to-read audiences rather than convenience ones, right? And recover their private preferences. So the other thing we liked a lot about these was that, the probability that you're clicking through an email based on whatever, demand effects or people, is very low. And so it was very kind of private. And the cost, of course, is that we're only able to focus on short-term outcomes. We're only focusing on clicks and applications. We're not able to look at, did they actually invent, the new photovoltaic cell? And that's kind of trade-off with this approach. So that's all I had. Right. And for example, in the first one, just even getting to applications required setting up a surrogate index. In the IIC one, we had more power, so we didn't have to do that. But even so, looking at even further longer-term outcomes would be a thing that would be in your mind. So that's all I had. Thank you very much. Do I sit here or do I go back there?
Come back for now.
Come back there. Okay, perfect.
Great, thanks, Jorge. That's super interesting. One quick question for you, actually. I should not have told you to sit so quickly. Was, I guess you got at this a little bit in the second set of experiments, but it seems like there's maybe an opportunity here to estimate, conditional average treatment effects and really tailor these emails to entrepreneurs based on different subsets of the population being responsive to different types of messaging. Is that something that you explored, or are the partners that you work with kind of open to that type of thing? I think yesterday we talked a bit in some of the sessions about how even when we estimate these HTEs, it can be difficult to actually act upon them because of forking a product too many times or something like that.
Yeah, so it was a big problem actually trying to get because we had divergent responses, right? It's not like everybody responded well to a certain messaging, but rather, for example, in our experiments, women responded more to social impact message than the money message, and the other way around for men. And so while you could vary the email, you couldn't vary completely the presentation of the competition. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so, it did seem like there was a trade-off to be made, and that would have require a little bit more strategy from the companies. Like, who are you trying to prioritize reaching, and do you want to do that rather than only saying, well, we have heterogeneity, so we would be able to just take advantage of that to maximize intake, because we did expect that, once there's an email, there's the website, and when there's like a range of things that would attenuate the rest, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Okay.
Thanks.